Good morning. Yeah, the first presentation. Yeah. Right? I wanted cheap. That's don't use it. Please.
I have mine.
Okay. Yeah.
And I say correctly, Mostafa.
Yeah.
How do you say your last name?
Yeah. Stuff. Khorsandi. Yeah. I said KH. Yeah. You pronounce it K. You're Anglophone. I mean, your first language. Okay. Then. Do you have the K in your language? Okay. Then that would be simple. Khorsandi. Khorsandi. Again. Khorsandi.
People butcher my name all the time.
That's fun. You can say that most of the time. If even I won't pronounce it.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining again for the general hydrology. This is part 3. We have part 4 in the afternoon. We have 4 speakers this morning, and I would like to start. So our first speaker is Mostafa Khorsandi. Thank you.
Sound is fine. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I would like to present our recent results that is about water temperature modeling. And yeah, let's go. I would like to provide some context for the case study. The case study is Nechako Watershed in central British Columbia. This case study is interesting because there's a dam, Kenny Dam, that divert all of the water for part of the reach, and they control the water using the Skins Lake spillway. I don't see. Sorry. I mean, it's distorted for me. I cannot show that. But yeah, the label is triangle. Rio Tinto, the owner of Kenny Dam and Skins Lake Spillway, is mandated to control the water temperature at Finmore under 20 degrees centigrade for 20th of July to 20th of August. And they call this program Summer Water Temperature Program, or STMP. And yeah, why it's important? Because Nechako Watershed is the spawning ground for multiple species, including sockeye salmon, chinook, and sturgeon. And that's the main source of the food for at least 15 First Nations. And this part is completely unceded. I need to acknowledge that it's the unceded territory of these First Nations. I appreciate it. Okay. Yeah, our objectives for 9 stations that we had over there, we had both water temperature sensors and stream flow monitoring stations. And our goal was to simulate water temperature using the air-to-stream model. Also, we had some observed gaps in the past, using that model to fill the gaps and then simulate the water temperature for using hindcast the water temperature for the past as much as we have the stream flow using that calibrated model. Also, when we have the calibrated model, we can simulate the naturalized flow situation. Imagine the scenario that the dam was not over there. That means naturalized. And then using those quantiles of water temperature and using the temperature duration curve, we did an analysis that I will share the results. Yeah, these are the locations for 9 stations. Wow, that's really bad. Okay. Here is better. Air-to-stream is extremely simple model. Just 2 inputs are necessary, the air temperature and a stream flow for the calibration phase of that. Then for the objective function, we use RMSE, and the calibration method was CMOS. I won't provide more detail, but I would be happy to answer your questions about the algorithm and the model. And then we calculated some other metrics just to make the paper fancy. Daily simulation depends on the station, was from 1950 to 2023. And as I mentioned, the case study was Mostafa Watershed. Then the method is like this. Of course, we had the sensors. Then when we gather the data, we shape those duration curves that you can see in this panel. Then we calculate the quantiles for each year, and for each quantile we have multiple values, and since they are separated, I mean they are not correlated, we can treat them as random variables and then fit the distribution, and using the distribution we can do the frequency analysis. Then repeat this process for all the stations, all the quantiles, and yeah, that's it. Then our results can be useful for the future water management of the Skins Lake Spillway and Kenny Dam. Yeah, the results are for 9 stations, but for the simplicity and the time of this presentation, I will present the results for Vanderhoof, that is closest station to Fenimore, the objective function of a STMP program. For all the stations, RMSE was less than 1.5 degrees centigrade, and that's surprisingly good because the diurnal variation is from 0 to 5 degrees centigrade per day, and also the precision of the sensor is half a degree, then 1.5 is exceptionally good. And you can see that for the Vanderhoof station, the RMSE was close to 1. Then you can see that, for example, some data gaps, that the sensor was lost, a bear attacked the station or something like that, then we can fill those gaps to do a better frequency analysis. Then here, in this complicated figure, oops, back, yeah. In this figure, you can see 3 scenarios. The observed one, we calculated the interannual mean, and then in green, you can see the naturalized water temperature. And naturalized water temperatures showed us that if the dam and STMP was not in action, the water temperature for that period would be at least 1 to 2 degrees higher than the current situation. In the top figure, you can see that for STMP period in dark red, the water temperature is heavily controlled by releasing enough water from the Skins Lake spillway. But unfortunately, since this STMP program is limited to a 1-month period, before and after this period, we have exceedances. then probably Rio Tinto needs to think about it. Then let's go to the frequency analysis. The middle, we have the observed values. The left one is the regulated one, the current situation, and we simulate the simulations. And on the right one, yeah, that's the naturalized one, using the naturalized flow that we simulated using another model. That was another study. Then you can see that the observed values, they show a wider range for high temperatures. Then when we do the frequency analysis, here I provided just the results for Van der Hoof. You can see that the simulations, they are relatively acceptable for all the quantiles. Then using this frequency, I mean, the metric for the calibration is good, the frequency between quantiles good, then we can trust those simulations to assess further. Then, using the frequency analysis, we can calculate the exceedance probability for each quantile. Quantile 0 means the maximum temperature. Then, what is happening? The results showed that for the threshold 20 degrees centigrade, we can see that every 2.5 years, or with around 40 to 50% probability, we have the exceedance of 20 degrees centigrade. What is the consequence? When we know that the number of sockeye salmon and together with other migratory fishes has been declined 80% in Western Canada, that's the reason. Because that exceedance of 20 degrees centigrade decreased the dissolved oxygen, increased the number of parasites, and also destroyed the habitat for fish species. Then that would be a really important issue for Rio Tinto, the owner of the dam. Then using these frequency analysis, they can calculate the probability, and also we understood that if the maximum temperature is not possible for some other stations, at least for Q5 and Q10, the simulations are reliable. Then the future program can be based on our simulations and to create a new protocol to cover the whole summer period and consider more species. Okay. I think I already mentioned that. Then, in conclusion, yes, of course, we published, and you can check our paper. I would be happy to receive your comments on that. And the TDC-based frequency analysis offer a robust method for water temperature analysis and management in the Nechako watershed. When we know that some stations, they were regulated, some of them, they were natural flow, then again, our methodology was robust for both of them. And we hope that the decision makers in the future use this method to preserve some diversity and species over there. And also this method is applicable global. I appreciate my colleagues, my supervisor. Without their help and support, this research was not possible, especially for the fieldwork that was heavily intense. And I appreciate the collaboration of First Nations, Rio Tinto, and INSERC that they funded this project. And thank you.
We have time for questions, and I'm happy to bring the mic. If anyone has any questions? Yeah, there are two here.
Okay.
Have an argument over who needs to be more Canadian right now. Really neat talk, really impressive model. So I have a little, I guess, maybe two questions, but I'll try to wrap it into one, about the physics basis of your model and how that might map to different governing processes. So I noticed that your temperatures dropped to 0 during the winter time, and I'm wondering what you do in the ice on period, and whether that is also physically based or how that kind of works in your numerical representation.
Yeah, the simulations for near zero, they are not reliable. This model is not designed for freezing temperature. And that's why we limited our analysis for high temperatures. But there are some, I mean, as far as I know, the other models that they use for that watershed, and I mean, like HECRAS, like SECO, and others that we use, or some other colleagues they use, they don't cover the freezing temperature. But close to the freezing, air-to-stream was better than all of them. About the physics behind it, it's super simple. It's just air-to-stream assume that we can aggregate all of the surface heat budget into water temperature, and based on the advection from upstream and the surface heat budget, calculate the water temperature. It's the methodology, I mean, the numerical method is Range-Gutta 4, I think. Yeah, and that's it.
Awesome, thanks. Is there time?
Good, thank you. Jeez.
Okay. Very interesting talk. Thanks a lot. My question was more around the dam and the water releases from the dam. Do you know where they're sourcing that water release from? Is it a surface release or a at depth release? And depending on the answer to that question, what implication might that have for how you naturalize the flow in the sort of the naturalized simulations?
Thank you for your question. Yes, the release is from surface. Unfortunately, when they constructed the dam in 1950s, it was, yeah, they never thought about it. And now there's a work to build a structure to release the water from these different levels, but in another location, not the Skins Lake spillway. I think it's close to Nechako. No, sorry, Chislada Falls, close to that place. And yeah, it's still an ongoing research. What was the other question? Sorry. Oh. Okay, yeah.
Okay. We might have time for another quick question. If not, we can move on to our next speaker.
I think there was one question
okay.
here.
There's one question there. Sorry, I didn't see it. Okay.
Okay.
You cover 2 in 1. Yeah. Thank you
Good.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And our next speaker is Andrew Ireson. I'll just switch here. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Magali. Does that work? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about some work in progress, energy conservative solutions for coupled heat and mass transport in frozen soils. This is work I've been doing with PhD student Alana and Simon, Chris, and Seth. So basically, the frozen state of the soil, as we've heard many times in this conference, is very important for a number of reasons. One of them that's really important is when we're doing large-scale hydrological modeling, the partitioning of snowmelt between runoff and infiltration is very hard to get right, and it's a problem, a known problem in the large-scale models. So we need to understand the frozen state of the soil. The processes that control this are very sensitive and depend on a number of different driving factors, as everybody knows, and as I'm going to demonstrate with some field observations. There's also a gap, I would argue, in the modeling in terms of the state of the art in coupled heat and mass transport not having a very sophisticated representation of the upper boundary condition. So I'll talk about that as well. And basically, my objective at the end of all of this work is to come up with a framework that we can use to systematically evaluate the different assumptions that we make in frozen soil and snow models, so that we can better understand why models are different and what are the really important processes and how we should represent them. So we'll start off in the field. This is Saint Denis. Masaki mentioned it yesterday. It's a field site 30 minutes east of Saskatoon. And I've got loads of instruments here that we've been measuring for more than 10 years now. I'm just going to today focus on some temperature profiles from an upland and a lowland, from which we can derive these observed 0-degree isotherms or freezing depths. I've got all this data from different years, all shown on the same plot from the lowland profile and the upland profile. Looking at this, you can see straight away that the upland profile is freezing deeper than the lowland, and that's because it's drier. So the drier upland is freezing deeper. But there's also a lot of interannual variability in these data. So can we try and explain why that is happening? So if we look at the snow, and this is the SWE that's been simulated but validated against field surveys, the thing we can see straight away, look at the lowland profile, look at that orange line, the shallowest snow is coincident with the shallowest freezing, which is not what you expect, because we understand, and indeed it's true, snow acts as an insulator. So you'd expect less freezing with deeper snow, and we're seeing the opposite here. And basically, it's just, if you look at all the different years, it's not coming out as snow is a single control on freezing. So then we look at temperature, and I'm showing here the cumulative temperature over the winter, measured on site. And this time we see that again, that shallow freezing is happening in the warmest year. So that does make sense. But if we look closely, we see that the deepest freezing is not happening in the coldest year. So again, temperature alone is not explaining what's going on. Then we can look at something else, look at soil moisture. So this is the liquid water content integrated over the top 75 centimeters of the soil. And what we see here is that the wetter the soil is, the shallower the freezing is in general. And so that year where we had very shallow freezing, it was both very warm and very wet in the soil. So this is nice field data. You can't really argue with it. The insight here is that the freezing is dependent on multiple things. There's no single variable controlling what's going on. So more snow leads to shallower freezing. Colder air leads to deeper freezing, and wetter soils in our soils lead to shallower freezing, but not in all soils. So it's a multivariate problem. You need to get all of these things to know what's going to happen. Taken individually, you can't predict what's going to happen. And so really this motivates us to use models. We need to use physically based models to understand what's going to happen and the frozen state of the soil. So when we look at the models that are out there, I'm sort of saying there are two main categories of model. There's the land surface models, which have a very sophisticated representation of the snow and the exchanges between the ground and the atmosphere. But they tend to have a fairly simplified representation of the soil. And it's often applied at very coarse spatial resolutions and with oversimplifications. And on the other hand, the sophisticated coupled heat and mass transport models, which exist, tend to have a very simple upper boundary condition. So that's the limitation there. So essentially, both of these classes of models has a limitation. So I took a bunch of land surface models and ran them all. And also some colleagues, Benjamin Bouchard from ECCC, ran SVS. And just to compare how they simulated SWE, given the same driving data at Saint Denis. And what you can see from this plot is that there's a lot of variability in that simulated snowpack. Probably not surprising to anybody that the different models give you very different answers. What's also important is the timing of the snowmelt, right? So there's about a 2-week spread in the timing of snowmelt in these different models. And that's potentially very important and something that we would want to try and get right. So I also looked from some of these models at what they're doing in the soil, and here is class, and we're simulating here the freezing depth. So the red line is the observed freezing depth, and the blue is simulated. I should say I didn't calibrate any of the models I'm showing you today, so it's a kind of, you could say, out-of-the-box simulation. So in general, we see that class is under-predicting our freezing depth. And I applied SUMA, and SUMA is, in general, over-predicting freezing. And I also applied SHORE, and apart from the first couple of years, which we could call spin-up, sure does a really good job on this one. So surprisingly good. I think maybe it was just lucky that the parameters happened to be really good for this particular case. But anyway, the real point I'm trying to make is that all of the models are giving us very different answers. So my goal is to understand why. And to do that, the way I propose to proceed is to develop a new model. It's a one-dimensional point scale model. And my goal is to basically get a very sophisticated heat and mass transport model of the soil, but also with a sophisticated upper boundary condition. In other words, a snowpack. So I'm working on a Python script that's going to solve the conservation equations for the snow and the soil, heat and mass, using an ODE solver with adaptive time stepping, which I've shown is a really good method. It's very mass and energy conservative. And it's also very concise. You can write code that's easily readable. And then try and use this framework to investigate the sensitivity of the different modeling decisions. So that's where I'm trying to go in the long run. I didn't realize how complicated and difficult it was going to be to write a snow model, but I have by now kind of done it. This is the result from my snow model, which is based heavily on Richard Essery's FSM model. So there's an energy balance and a mass balance of the liquid and the ice in the snow. One of the things I found very challenging with this is the energy losses from the snowpack. I think I'm relearning things that people have known for 40 years or more. So it's nothing novel here, but it was very, interesting for me to realize how sensitive those outgoing energy fluxes are, long wave radiation and sensible heat, and the ground heat flux as well. And I was getting crazy temperatures a lot of the time. So modeling the snow was not easy. It took a lot longer than I thought it would. But just to reemphasize, the reason I'm doing this is because I want to get the output from the snow in terms of the flux of water and energy so that I can use that as the upper boundary for my soil. That's my goal. I did compare my snow model with all of these other models, and mine is the light blue line. So it's kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of SWE, but it's the latest model to melt. It holds on to the snow for the longest, which is probably a problem. And I suspect that's because of the exchange of heat with the soil. But I'm still trying to sort of figure that out. Turning to the soil, thank you. So I'm just going to show you today a very simple simulation with the soil. So again, it's coupled heat and mass. So I have a 3-meter soil column. It's got a uniform initial temperature of -1 degree. The water is partitioned, but it's partially saturated. The water is partitioned between ice and liquid water. And then I'm going to put a heat pulse in at the top and thaw the soil from the top down. So there's no water being injected, just heat. And what we see is that the soil warms up, it gets to 0, you go through the latent heat, and then you overcome the latent heat and you start to move into positive temperatures. As the soil thaws, you can see in this middle plot, the liquid water content. It looks like an infiltration simulation, right? But it's actually a thawing simulation. So as the soil thaws, the soil moisture turns into liquid, the ice content goes down, and you see that wetting kind of front going down with the thawing front. This is quite nice, I thought. And then there's also free drainage at the lower boundary, so as the soil at the bottom thaws, the water can drain out. And the plots on the left are just showing, again, it's perfectly mass and energy conservative. So then I thought, okay, well, this is a simulation where I'm not including the phenomenon of cryosuction. If you're not familiar with cryosuction, this is where when you freeze a soil, there's a matrix potential that's basically determined by the temperature. So you get these very high gradients that kind of draw water towards the freezing point. So anyway, it comes in Darcy's law when you solve this. When I put cryosuction in, this is the difference that it makes. I've got to go quickly here, but basically, if you look at the ice content on the right, you can see this kind of peak in ice content at the wetting front or the thawing front. So it behaves as I would hope it would behave. Basically, the conclusion from this is cryosuction is very decisive in terms of the model outcomes. Okay, so just to conclude then, freeze-thaw processes and associated mass movement is very complicated, and there are multiple controls, as we all probably know, and different models give us very different outcomes. So I'm trying to come up with a systematic approach to figure out why that is. One way I could have done this is to use the SUMA model, which is in theory able to do this, but it's generally applied at very large scales, and it's a bit complicated to make these edits easily. So our approach seeks to use a simple model in a script that we can easily edit. And the next step here is to couple the soil and the snow together, and that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Yeah. Questions for Andrew? I have a quick one coming from a field-based researcher, and we're seeing a lot of, warmer spells in the spring. 2021 had a long warm spell. How do you think those warm spells will affect modeling? Do you think you can capture those because the trees go up and down, they start transpiring, and,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
the freezing and thawing, yeah.
Well, the tree bit, maybe not yet.
Yeah.
But the phenomenon of midwinter melts is something that people in Calgary know all about. And basically, you melt the snow, it refreezes in the soil, and it gives you a completely different infiltration capacity. In theory, yes, we can use the models to look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah, on there.
Really nice work. I'm excited to see this. I have a question that's probably predictable coming from me about soil freezing characteristic curves and unfrozen water content. So I'm wondering if A, you have a soil freezing characteristic in your model, and B, how you relate that to the data that you've collected in the field, because you have these beautiful measurements of total water content over the winter period, which probably includes liquid water and solid water, which I would love to know how you collect the data in the field as well. So many questions in one, but mostly revolved around that unfrozen water content.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So at this site, we have these dielectric probes, and they measure liquid water content and temperature at the same time. And so you plot the data against each other, you get the soil freezing characteristic curve. And arguably, well, I think you do. So we can fit the curves to that, and we have it all in here. It's all based on the generalized Clapeyron equation, that stuff, which I don't 100% believe, but it's what we all use at the moment. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew. We will move on to our next speaker, and that's Scott. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Ketcheson. I'm an associate professor at Athabasca University, where I'm also a Canada Research Chair in Hydrological Sustainability. So what I'm excited to be here this morning to talk to you a little bit about is some of the work from my Stony Mountain Headwater Catchment Observatory. So I'll be talking about runoff partitioning and controls within a nested catchment complex. So some of the work that I'm sharing today is that of a master's student, Paulina Meyer, who came over from LMU in Germany under the MyTac Global Link, and she spent the summer running around Stony Mountain, measuring stream flow and sampling water for isotopes. My other co-authors here, Jennifer Adama and Ralph Ludwig, contributed as well. So I'd like to start with this picture, looking out on the beautiful Treaty 8 territory, where I feel very fortunate to be able to do my field work. But I think it's also an important picture to share for folks who maybe haven't spent any time in this part of Alberta. The Western Boreal Plain region in northern Alberta is a beautiful mosaic of forests, wetlands, and watercourses. And the way that these landscapes exchange water is really quite complex. What maybe doesn't come across clear in this picture is that there are a lot of wetlands in this landscape as well. About half the landscape are wetlands, and most of those are peatlands. So because of this, they play an important ecological and hydrological role. Now, if you've been paying attention this week, you probably already know that the climate in the boreal region is subhumid, so it's quite dry. yet we still have a lot of wetlands. But because of the dry climate, we have a variable but typically pretty low catchment runoff efficiencies or runoff ratios. So the proportion of rainfall that's produced as runoff is variable and controlled by antecedent conditions, but often quite low because of the high amount of storage. And so those all sort of speak to my overall research goal, which is towards understanding freshwater generation and headwater catchments and the importance of the water generated in these regions for down gradient ecosystems and receiving regional rivers. So I'm working in the mid to lower reaches of the Athabasca River Basin. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's quite a large river basin, almost 160,000 square kilometers. I'm working at a much smaller scale than that. But I think it's important to note that from the headwaters in the Athabasca River to the catchment outlet, it drains huge amounts of Canada's boreal region. So as you move from the headwaters through to the catchment outlet, the volumetric flow increases because the river's draining larger and larger areas. But on a per unit area basis, the catchment becomes less productive hydrologically as it's moving through these mid to lower reaches in the subhumid boreal plain. And that's why I think it's really important to understand the processes that control the storage and release of water in these sort of dry reaches in the mid to lower parts of the Athabasca River Basin. So maybe you've heard me speak about Northern Alberta's mountains previously. Maybe you don't know that Alberta has mountains in the northern part of the province, but that's why they're in quotes, because they're not like the proper Rocky Mountains, but I think they're important anyway. So if you look at a topographic map of Alberta, you see the proper mountains to the southwest, but if you look at the northern part of the province, you'd see a number of these erosional upland landforms are scattered across the northern part of the province. And I think that in spite of having a small geographical area, they have a disproportionately large influence on the hydrology. And I'll tell you why that is. I'm working on one of these landforms called Stony Mountain, which is about 40 kilometers south of Fort McMurray. And if you look at a shaded topographic relief and overlay the stream network on there, you can see that rivers drain radially off of Stony Mountain, and they're draining into these other tributaries and sort of more major regional rivers, including the Hanging Stone River. So this is looking from the west to the east at the western edge of Stony Mountain. You can see lots of different rivers flowing off the western edge, and they're all basically flowing in to the Hanging Stone River. That then ends up going into the Clearwater, just up gradient of the confluence with the Athabasca. So it seems like sort of a hot spot for freshwater generation, a lot of little streams and things. And in part, that's because there's actually more rainfall on Stony Mountain than we expect in this region. So we've been measuring rainfall for a number of years now. So that plot that keeps flashing, I guess. What I want you to take from that is that rainfall, we compare it on top of Stony Mountain to the nearby Fort McMurray Airport Station, and it's either about the same or up to 35% higher. So because Stony's just a little bit elevated, it gets more rainfall, and so it's actually quite a bit wetter than we expect in this region. So for these and lots of other reasons, it's a gorgeous place to work. But for these reasons, I established a number of years ago now what I named the Stony Mountain Headwater Catchment Observatory. So it comprises a series of small headwater catchments on top of Stony Mountain. So there's 5 of these headwater catchments. They're all under 10 square kilometers. And those are sort of nested within these larger mesoscale catchments and where we're measuring stream flow in some of these regional rivers that are upwards of about 200 square kilometers. So all very small from a catchment hydrology perspective. And when I started, didn't have a lot of resources for equipment, so I got deep discounts for being sort of the field guinea pig of beta deployment of a new technology, low power wide area sensor networks. And so we put a bunch of these out there. It was really hard work and a lot of sort of challenges, I guess. But we ended up publishing a paper on like the application and performance of this wide area or low power wide area sensor network. So you can read about that if you're interested. But now we've got these stations transmitting data as far as 2 kilometers between the transmitter and receiver, which is pretty good for this setting. So yeah, and we've got a lot of data now on rainfall and runoff, and so we did some analysis putting the rainfall runoff events into the Hydrun toolkit in MATLAB that came out of Sean Carey's group, and this is looking at the range in runoff ratio. So again, that's the proportion of rainfall that's produced as runoff in the headwater catchments, and you can see here that it's really quite variable. There's quite a big range from about 10 to 90%. And with an average of about 32%, so this is higher than what we would expect on a regional basis. That is typically more around 1 to 27%. And I think the variability indicates the sort of range of different controls, including antecedent conditions on the runoff responses of these little catchments. But as you put on the mesoscale catchments now, we see the variation compresses and the average values come down a little bit closer to what we would expect at the regional catchments as these different processes in the headwater regions sort of get homogenized out at a larger scale. But the key message here is that the headwater catchments are really productive. They have higher runoff efficiencies and are important regions, I think, for water supply. But I wanted to understand a little bit more about like what's controlling the variability that we're seeing in these catchments. They respond wildly differently to similar rainfall amounts. And so we wanted to start with catchment composition, looking at the proportion of different landscape types in the catchments. So this is got a little drone and fly it around, it's fun. But this is looking at one of the catchments, and it's got sort of a central wetland that's flanked by a low gradient, sort of more heavily treed setting, and then surrounded by sort of forested upland. So we can then look at the proportion, the relative proportion of these different landscape types within the different catchments and compare it to the catchment runoff responses. So we did that for a couple of years, and we found sort of opposite trends in different years in the same catchment. So it's kind of, again, highlights the importance of these controls like catchment connectivity and antecedent conditions on the relationship between rainfall and runoff. So on the note of catchment connectivity, I know we've heard a bit about that earlier this week, and I think it's super interesting and really important. All these headwater catchments we instrumented with transects that sort of span from the forest into the wetland into the forest on the other side, so that we can look at water table configurations. And that's what we're looking at here. These are water table elevations, and you can see that generally the flow is from the west through the wetland and then out the east. And but interestingly, there's a period of time where after a lot of rainfall, it fills up the storage in the forest to the east, and we have periods of time where the elevation of the water table in the forest actually meets and slightly exceeds the water table in the wetland. And so that's when the storage is basically full in the forest and it connects with the wetland. And of course, these times when that happens correspond with the highest catchment runoff efficiencies and runoff ratios. So the catchment's sort of full, the forest is connected up with the wetland, and then we get high runoff efficiencies. So we wanted to look at a little bit more about some of the stream flow components that are contributing to the water that's moving through these little headwater streams. So this is some of the work that I mentioned that Paulina did. We've been collecting isotope samples for since 2018, I guess, but she wanted to run around and keep doing it and do this differing partitioning to look at the relative contributions of rain, surface water, peat interflow, and groundwater. So we developed a sort of local meandric water line and identified the signatures of these components. And then now this is looking at 4 years of cumulative runoff data across 3 of these headwater catchments, and then 1 of the regional mesoscale catchments. And you can see that as we saw before, higher runoff ratios in the headwater reaches. But now putting on the relative contribution of the various components to stream flow, you can see that there's a predominance of the surface water and peat interflow in the headwater reaches. And then as you move to the mesoscale catchments, we get an increasing contribution or proportion of groundwater. So if we break that out into sort of year by year proportions of these different contributions, we can start to look at how the proportions vary depending upon whether or not it's a wet or dry year. So the plot that I've added to the bottom here is bar graphs of total runoff over the season. The top represents the partitioning across those three components. And then the orange points, we added in a dryness index where we looked at the PET to P ratio. So you can see that in 2020 and 2023, they're relatively wet years and a couple of dry years in between. And then that changes the relative proportion of surface or peat water, which is higher in the wet years, and there's more groundwater during the drier years. So to just wrap this up, headwater catchments have really high but quite variable runoff efficiencies, and the role of wetland is variable, but again, highly dependent upon antecedent conditions. The surface or peat interflow water is a dominant in the headwater catchments, and then it's especially prevalent under wet conditions. And groundwater becomes more important in these larger catchments and, of course, during drier years. So they're really highly variable, controlled by all these similar things, including and especially antecedent moisture conditions and catchment connectivity. And I put here need higher resolution data. So we're dependent upon grab samples. And I realized that's a bit of a shortfall. So last year we bought some of the ISCO auto samplers. We've got those deployed so we can start to look at what's happening with the isotopic signature during events. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I welcome any questions.
Any questions for Scott? I have a question. Yeah, really interesting work. I wonder if you end up looking in connectivity thresholds and if you see different thresholds to the different catchments.
Yeah, so we didn't include any formal threshold analysis here, but certainly we're working on developing storage indices and relating it to water table elevation, especially in the wetland relative to the forest. So there's thresholds apparent in the data, but we haven't done the threshold analysis yet. But I mean, it's very clear that there is threshold-like behavior.
Yeah, thank you. Any other question? We might have time for a quick one. Okay, Andrew.
I was just quickly wondering, when you had your piezometers, you had one of them responding to the rainfall events and two of them just didn't seem to respond at all.
Yep.
Not sure if you said it, but why was that, do you know?
I think it's driven by the storage properties, the soils themselves, where in the wetland, it's highly organic, really high specific yield and relatively stable compared to the mineral soils in the forest that have a much lower specific yield. And because of that, the same input of rainfall results in a much stronger response in the water table elevation, and that allows them to sort of connect up.
Thank you so much, Scott. And we'll move to our next speaker, Krishna Kathul. And is Krishna here? I guess we don't have a next speaker. Or no, oh, sorry, I didn't see you coming. It's a big room. Yay. Awesome, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Krishna Kathul. I'm a graduate student from University of Northern British Columbia under the Master's Program of Natural Resource and Environmental Studies. Today, I'll be presenting my result on the simulation of the hydrological response of the forest disturbance in Western Canada using dynamical land use approach. Here's my outline for today's presentation. I'm trying to show two of the images representing the wildfire and mountain pine beetle impact on the forest, which are the core drivers for the forest disturbance for my study. I'd like to start with the economical and ecological aspect of the forest. From the economic perspective, forest is contributing in around 33 billion to the GDP of Canada, and it's providing near about 200,000 direct jobs to the people. From the ecological perspective, forest is covering around 40% of the total land area, and it is undergoing on the natural cycle of growth, disturbance, and regeneration. But at the recent time, mainly due to the climate change and human activities, this cycle is disturbed, namely by four of the drivers, main drivers. One is insect, of course, forest harvesting, wildfire, and forest deforestation. Out of them, I want to highlight two key aspects, that is insects, which is affecting around 5% of the total forest area, and wildfire, which is affecting around 1% of the total forest areas. I'm trying to show how these drivers are impacting the forest in the recent time. I have a map on the left side that is showing the expansion of the mountain pine beetle over the forest in from southern part of BC to the northern part of BC, and it is extending towards the interior Alberta as well. And these light gray color are showing the expanded region after the year of 2000. Similarly, we can see that on the right-hand side, there's a map showing the perimeter of the burned areas due to the wildfire. And it is covering whole Canada, and especially in the BC, it is covering the huge portion of the BC. And there is a plot showing that the number of large forest fire is increasing in the recent time. I have designed three objectives for my research. I'll be first assessing the current status of mountain pine beetle and wildfire events. I'll be simulating the hydrological response of the forest disturbance, and I'll simulate the recovery pattern of the hydrology, which changes in the forest composition after disturbance. I'm trying to show my study area, which is showing two test beds. The first one lies in Alberta, second one lies in British Columbia. As represented in the figure A over here, it is a McLeod River basin, and it has an area of near about 2,500 kilometers square. In the recent time, there is a exponential increase of the mountain pine beetle. If we take a look into the data from 2009 to 2019, the more than 64,000 trees are affected, and these trees are presented here by the pink dots. And I have a second test bed watershed known as North River Basin, and this is a part of the Nezaco watershed, and it has an area of around 6,000 kilometers square. And during the recent time, from 2010 to 2023, nearly 30% of the total area is burned by the wildfire, and the major wildfire happened in near about 2018. I'm trying to show my methodology on this slide. To achieve my methodology, I am using the FIG model as a hydrological simulation tool. FIG model is a semi-distributed hydrological model that is working on the grid basis level. All the water balance of this model is calculating based upon the grid. So I have taken a grid size of near about 5 kilometers on a daily time step. I have coupled this model with routing model in order to calculate the stream flow.
We'll try and sort the audio out.
I'm coupling my model with the routing model in order to find the stream flow at the outlet. I'm using the stream flow at the hydrometric station in order to calibrate and validate the model. Once I validate my model, I'll be running three different simulations. First one will be the baseline simulation would be with normal vegetation. And I have two more experiments with the first one with the multiple scenarios of the forest loss, and I have a scenario for the forest replacement loss. These results are showing my calibration and validation results. The calibration and validation is performing well. They are comparable. They are comparable with the annual hydrograph of the observation data sets. I have some weight bias for the Norte River Basin. This is mainly due to the weight bias that was present in the input forcing, that was precipitation data from the ERA 5 land data. Once I calibrate and validate my model, I'm creating a multiple scenarios of the vegetation loss. This panel plot is showing the multiple scenarios of the vegetation loss for Upper McLeod River Basin. This panel plot is showing the vegetation loss scenarios for the Notley River Basin. And if you see the column for this one is representing the first column is representing the origin vegetation fraction. Second column is representing the vegetation scenario of the 30% forest loss. Similarly, third column is representing the 90% forest loss. As you can see over here, for the evergreen needle leaf class, the vegetation, there is a forest loss that is decreasing over here. Similarly, if this loss is compensated by the increasing the barren land in this vegetation file, which are shown over here. I utilized same approach for the Norte River Basin as well. These are the results for the vegetation loss experiments. First one, these plots are representing the forest loss experiment for the Upper McLeod River Basin. Basically, when we take a look into the 30% forest loss, we are not seeing any significant change in the discharge. But when it comes to the 90% forest loss, we are seeing the overall increase in the discharge by 10%. And if we take a look into the early facet and the peak flow, there is a increase of discharge by the amount of 21%. Similarly, for the multiple scenarios of the Norte River Basin as well, we are seeing the overall increase in the discharge. And for the 90% case, the overall discharge is increase in discharge is around 33%. The work on Norte River Basin is still in progress, though. Once we take a look into the forest loss scenarios, we take a look into another scenario, that is by replacing the lost forest with the new type of vegetation, that is deciduous needle leaf. And we plotted the three scenarios over here. I have a baseline with a zero, with a normal vegetation that is represented by the blue color. I have another scenario of with the forest loss of 90% that is represented by the blue dotted lines. And I have a third scenario of the forest replacement with new vegetation that is represented by the red color. And we can see that from our surprisingly, the hydrograph is not restored, although the vegetation is fully restored over here. This is mainly due to the change in the canopy and rooting system and interception processes. We can see some recovery of the hydrograph during the early facet, although there is not much recovery during the peak flows. To summarize our key finding, I'd like to say we implement the peak models on the Notley River Basin and Upper McLeod River Basin, seeing the multiple scenarios of the vegetation loss, mainly due to mountain pine beetle and wildfire. Our overall result is showing the increase of the discharge in near about more than 10%, that is around 12%. For the Upper McLeod River Basin, and for the Nolde River Basin, the increment is around 33%. And the key finding is that although if there is a auto regeneration of the forest, though it is not doing the restoration of the hydrograph. And I would like to thank my funding provider and data provider. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any question.
Thank you very much. Nice talk, and I'm sorry for the issue during your talk. Any questions? Yeah, there's one at the back.
Thank you for presentation. I'm just wondering, how do you, those scenarios develop for like a post-fire, how do you replace it? Like 50% of the forest replaced by barren land and grassland and shrublands. So it's quite complex, you know. Like we in CCRN and also in GWF, we develop sort of the scenario for like post-fire hydrology, how it affects. And well, I see like in a conclusion, like 90% is replaced with, it is, no, conclusion, yeah. Yes, it's like, it takes a long time, I guess, like to replace the barren forest, replaced with deciduous forest or the other things. So yeah, this is like, it's going to be interesting to have a table to represent which forest types we replace which one. And this, you know, is kind of the land cover changes over the time. And we're really interested also to, if you would like to develop for the future scenario to see how those fire can trigger the hydrology and responses of the model hydrology. Well, I see the, like, if it is like needle leaf replaced by the broadleaf, it will affect, but less. But if it is replaced by barrenland or shrublands and grassland, that's going to affect quite huge in the response of the hydrology and runoff the model.
Yeah, like I said, we are experimenting on this one. So we are assuming that the once there is a mountain pine beetle impact, we are assuming the scenario of clear cut in the forest. So it will be converted. Our assumption is to it will be converted to the barren land. So it is based upon the assumption of that one. Yeah. Do I answer the question? Sorry.
One more quick question here.
Thank you. I went to Notley, and I hate that basin because calibrating my model for that station was awful. It took like 6 months because of those large lakes. How do you consider those large lakes for using your model and the routing on that? Thank you.
Yeah, good question about that one. Yeah. I'm taking in consideration of 4 major lake, that is Fraser Lake, Francis Lake, and 2 more lakes. So big model has some configuration on that. I have used that. I have used the multiple depth scenarios of the lake based upon my grid size. So I'm incorporating the lakes. So it is calibrating for me, though there was pretty much high bias in the era 5 land data. So I'm thinking about the correcting that data as well. So yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you so much. We'll move to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Corinne.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Oh.
Can you hear me? I cannot hear you. Well, sorry for that. I don't even know if you can hear me now. I know there was some technical problem. Let's see. Everyone can see you and hear you. Oh, that's a tricky one. We can hear online. Okay. Should I start? Wait. Well, there are people online, so that would be still relevant. Yeah. I'll just try this again and see. Okay. It would be very weird to talk if I don't know if anyone can listen. But can you see the screen? Yeah, Nicola is online. Yeah, if you can see my screen, I can maybe just try and go on with the presentation. Can we hear? We do not see the presentation though. Okay. Try. I was not sure if I would be able to present. I know there was many technical problem in the other room also with people removed. Maybe they need to accept. Let's see. Green. Presentation screen share. Oh, I saw something. Yeah. Okay. Maybe you can see this slide now. I can see my PowerPoint. I mean, I would be comfortable to go on if we see the slides online. Okay. I don't know if it's me or the conference that are sharing. Oh yeah, I think it's me though. Yeah, okay. Perfect. So that looks like this works. I was hearing you the whole time. It's just now, since I've got online, that I cannot hear the room. Maybe still we don't have a lot of time. I can still go on with the slides. Many people online. Thank you, Nicola, for helping out. Okay, maybe I'll just go on. If the slides change, we'll see if anyone's online and you tell me, or I'll just shortcut that very briefly. I was, maybe you can hear, so you let me know, or whatever. I'll just talk alone. It would be very, very short. No matter what, I just wanted to present the SWAT mission. So it was SWAT. I'm a mission scientist for the Canadian Space Agency. Okay, so I have at least a thumbs up. At least one person is listening. And we had students this winter, and we've challenged them with finding new application for the SWOT data. SWOT, it stands for Surface, Water, and Ocean Topography. So it measures water elevation all around the globe. It's a very powerful mission. I'll say a few words about the mission that maybe some of interest for you, as I saw you're all hydrologists. I think you kind of love water level or water elevation. And that's something that is new with the mission. It's a synthetic aperture radar interferometric altimeter. So it does very large band of water elevation measurements all around the globe. Every 2 weeks, we have a full coverage. It's very used in the ocean. This is where it started, to measure sea surface anomalies. And then we've moved to the coast and estuaries, and now this type of technology is used for lake and rivers. It's kind of the new thing, being able to measure water elevation of those rivers network. So that's something we've targeted the students to look at. I'll let the slide so I can also see the comments in the chat. If you have anything, I can see the chat in that presentation mode. Sorry for that. But at least you could see that something that is new with the mission is the possibility to monitor all water level in that example of a watershed in a few minutes. So that was result really impressive from the mission. Here is the Manicouagan Reservoir. You could see, and all the different shades in blue is the difference in water level elevation, or water surface elevation, we say. And we wanted to know what was the exact precision we could have with those measurements to monitor rivers, especially because that was kind of new to the mission. So we wanted to know what was the spatial resolution. It was supposed to be 100 meters, so that was a lot of river. Was that more or less? That's something that we wanted to assess as a mission perspective. And assess the ability to also monitor sometimes extreme hydrologic event, because we receive a lot of demand on that as a space agency, trying to respond to emergency response. So that's something we wanted to know, is that enough temporal or spatial resolution to do so, and maybe eventually to monitor, to automate the detection of river behaviors such as anomalies on it. So they ended up with a very interesting case. I think that was a striking event that happened. It was a landslide in British Columbia that ended up in the Chilcotin River. You probably heard of that, a river that ends up in the Fraser River. So that was a good example, because this is a small river, normally to 50 to 100 meter wide. And then when the landslide occurred, it blocked the rivers for days, and it created a lakes upstream. And so the event lasted long enough, so there was a breach, but only a week later. And we were lucky enough to get some Sentinel-2 images, of course, but also SWOT, the satellite passed over the region three times, so before, during, and after that event. So that was interesting to see how that would perform. And maybe it would also give you some ideas on how you use the data of the mission. Like, we really went into the extreme of what that satellite could do, but you can imagine that it has a very huge spatial coverage. But looking very, very tight on the detail on the river, we were surprised to see that the profile water elevation along the river was measured by SWOT. You can see here with the different color bar from high level in red to blue. You could see before, like a normal river, and then during the event, we can see the increase in water elevation in the lake that formed upstream the dam created by the landslide. And then you could see also the change in the river after. So the river profile has changed a lot, way more steeper after the event. So they kind of, there was no in-situ measurement, but that was something we wanted to test case with this event. So they used the Sentinel also just to validate that the SWOT data were good over the river, and it ended up with quite a realistic result. You could see, so they did a little analysis of the water profile. You can see on the right side, it's the river in blue before, and in red is the river state after the breach in the dam that occurred. So you could see the normal profile in blue, and you can see the change after the landslide, after the breach also into it. that the lake still form. In red, you could see they still have this lake that now needs to flow slower, probably to the downstream. And that is still ongoing monitoring at the moment, because SWOT is a scientific mission, and it passed by now every week to monitor what happened after that. So it was a nice algorithm that they developed based on confidence interval based anomaly detection. So basically, you put a confidence interval, and then you could track is the river behavior is normal, or for that season now it's a huge anomaly. So they were able to track this down. So I hope it gives you a bit of idea of what the SWOT can do now with the rivers. I think that was something very good for us, because it means that we can monitor much more rivers than we thought we would. There's a 10% more rivers, which is a lot of more sampling we thought we would have. So it's hundreds of more river that can be monitored with SWOT. There's also discharge product. There's a lot of development around what could be derived from the SWOT measurements. Temporal resolution is great at highest latitude in Canada. I would say the coverage gets better. So it could be up to 3-5 days. You could have revisit time. And whenever you have a revisit time, you have very spatial variation that could be complementary to any water gauges in the area, or if you don't have any, you could have those spatial patterns. So you could create some maybe forcing for the model. I don't know, long-term statistics, especially in remote area where we don't have any data. So SWOT covers until all the northern passage in the north. So that's in all Canada and all globally. So that's a lot of more data that hopefully can be used in Hydrology, which was quite new. It's all open data. So I'll leave you with that. I don't know if you want to integrate in the future more of the SWOT or have a look. I think for hydrology and rivers, it would be mainly on her data. There's a lot of data, and the raster, I think SWOT level 2 raster data is I hope could be useful for you guys. So thanks a lot for your attention. Hope you heard something. You let me know. I'll stop there.